Hello, and welcome to the Paul Green Comedy PaulCast. The date is August 6th, 2024. This is episode 249. Stand-up comedian, actor, and improviser Paul Green coming to you as I share my journey pursuing a rather audacious dream. So, my goal in starting this podcast always was to do it daily, and I have posted daily for 249 straight days. The only thing that's gotten kind of weird is what time that I post, what dates that I'm talking about, and I've been sort of in this weird retro phase where I'm posting, but I'm reporting on like 2 days before. It's just getting confusing for me. And so from now, I'm just gonna say what day it is. Technically, I would be saying that this is for August 4th, I think, even though it's August 6th. Anyway, so today is August 6th. And this week is going to be a big week. I've got 3 midlife crisis comedy shows in a row, which will be a first for the midlife crisis comedy show. We're going to be at JP's Comedy Club in Gilbert Thursday night, Marana on Friday night, Vail on Saturday night, which are Marana and Vail are 2 suburbs of Tucson. Now, the unfortunate thing is the ticket sales for the Tucson shows have really stalled, and we were hoping to sell both of those venues out. We are very, very far from doing that, which is a little disappointing. We were hopeful that we had enough marketing clout, I guess. We have a guy who we hired to manage our Facebook ads who was very confident that we'd be able to sell out both shows. That is definitely not going to happen. So one of the venues has almost 600 seats, and we've sold about 50 tickets. So we're about 550 seats short of selling out that venue. The other venue has about 200 seats, and we've sold about 30. So we're about 170 short of selling out at that venue, which, you know, it's a little discouraging. Unfortunately, we're not even going to break even now. We're going to lose money on these shows, and you know that's not fun. At the same time, we also recognize that we're building a brand from scratch. Getting people out to a show is incredibly difficult these days. Inflation has gone on. Post-pandemic, I think, has really taken its toll on just live shows in general. I still think that, we're still sort of crawling out of that culturally. Maybe that's a huge excuse. Maybe the pandemic has nothing to do with it. But inflation might. And also just the reality that we're 2 non-famous comedians who are trying to advertise a show that nobody's ever heard of. So with all of those factors, I would say it's actually a miracle that we've sold. So we've sold in total about, 80? Yeah, about 80 tickets between the 2 shows in Tucson. We've sold much better at the JP show this Thursday. So, it's all kind of, I don't know. Just the ups and downs. Some things go well, some things don't go well. And I'm just finding more and more so much of pursuing a dream, and especially pursuing something that has any entrepreneurial element to it. Any element of you have to sell yourself and, in essence, eat what you kill. Like, you have to go do the hunting. Anything that isn't, well, I just show up and punch a clock and somebody else pays me for what it is that I do or don't do during a certain specified time. Anything beyond that, and don't get me wrong, there's plenty of ups and downs even in that scenario, but yeah, there's no real guarantee. And the reality of being entrepreneurial, being a dreamer, is you usually get paid last. Which I was thinking a lot about this. It's when you are an employee, you get paid first. And the owners get paid last. And there's this sort of cultural, how do I say this? Most of my adult life, I've heard this fantasy of like, oh, I'm my own boss. Oh, I run my own business. I do my own thing. I'm not, in corporate America. I'm not a cog in the wheel. I'm out being an entrepreneur. I'm my own boss. And that notion is so romanticized. And I'm not saying it shouldn't be romanticized. Well, actually, I am saying that. It probably shouldn't be romanticized. There's a reality that, hey, taking that path, sure, it is great to be your own boss. It is great to not punch a clock. It is great to be able to set your own hours. However, the notion that not having a boss or not having to punch a clock means that you have more freedom, I'm not exactly sure that that's accurate. Because all you're really doing is you're exchanging having a boss who's going to say, hey, show up at 9 and leave at 5, to now you have to show up all the time sufficiently enough to generate enough money to pay everybody else first and then hope there's some left over for you. So, the plus side of that is if you are running your own show, then the ceiling is much higher in terms of potential revenue. Because if you're starting a business or you're running your own business or you're doing your own thing, the plus side of that is there is no limit to how successful you can grow that business to be. And as long as you keep growing it and keep showing up and figuring out how to expand your inventory or expand your services and charge more for those services, sky's the limit. And I was thinking about this a lot with comedy. Even as a comedian, you can try to get booked in every venue that will pay you money to just show up. Anymore, those venues are far and few between, and the money that they're willing to pay is getting less and less and less. Whereas most of the time when somebody pays me to do comedy, by the time I travel there or whatever, I end up losing money. The only caveat to that is if you happen to be a famous comedian. But if you're a famous comedian, you actually are probably more entrepreneurial anyway, because what's going to happen is if you're famous enough, you don't actually need a comedy club to pay you a certain amount of money. You could just rent out a venue, pay the venue whatever they cost, sell your own tickets, sell out the venue, and then pocket the difference. And that's going to be a heck of a lot more money than you would get if you were trying to just get a comedy club to just pay you a flat fee to show up, right? And the reality is most comedians aren't famous, just by definition. And so there's this small handful of famous comedians who can do that, who can, really produce their own shows, pave their own way, and get paid handsomely for doing so. The rest of the comedians out there are all competing to try to get whatever money what any comedy club might potentially pay them. And there really is a ceiling to that. And it's a pretty low ceiling. So the route that I have found myself on in this journey is a route that is far more risky. In essence, I'm paying more money to do a show than any one person in an audience has paid to see me. So I'm actually paying the audience for the privilege to perform in front of them. They don't realize that. I'm not actually paying them. I'm paying advertisers and Facebook more money for the opportunity to show up in front of any audience than any one person in that audience has spent to buy a ticket to be there. In most cases, at least on those shows in Tucson. So why do that? Well, because the other side of this equation is there is no limit, theoretically, to how many tickets and venues and shows and ticket price that we can charge. I say we, I'm talking about me and my comedy partner, Josh. There's no limit to that. There is more venues in America, and especially if we're going to talk worldwide, that could potentially host our comedy show that we could rent and sell out. And those venues just keep getting bigger and bigger. Theoretically, could just get bigger and bigger and bigger. So it's like, well, if we can sell out a 200-seat theater and we start selling out 200-seat theaters, well, then the next goal will be like, well, can we sell out a 500-seat theater? And then if we can sell out a 500-seat theater once, then maybe we could sell out a 500-seat theater twice in a weekend. And if we could do it twice in a weekend, then maybe we could do it 5 times in a weekend. If we could do it 5 times in a weekend, then maybe we can then jump to 1,000-seat venue. And if we can jump to 1,000-seat venue and sell it out once, then maybe we could sell it out twice, et cetera, et cetera. And then that just gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. At least in terms of potential. Now, that's not today's reality, but that is what we are trying to build. And part of that building process means that in the meantime, we've lost money on most of the shows that we've done. Or at least we've broke even a couple times. So that's the exchange, though. It's either we do that, or he and I just keep trying to build our own comedy careers and are constantly at the mercy of how much somebody else is just willing to pay us to show up. And trying to get those gigs are infinitely more competitive and harder to get, and they're getting further and few between, and the money is getting less and less. It's just the reality of what's going on. I've heard that even in the college market, that the college market has really been cut down dramatically. Comedians had a potential to make really good money in the college circuit. I hear that that's going away. There's the Christian comedy market, which my buddy Josh was in. He's let me know that that has really dwindled a lot as well. But that's the thing. You're always at the mercy of somebody else telling you how much you're worth. But if you can go and build your own thing and build your own brand and get it to a point to where you are the one in charge of you're in charge of your destiny. Now, the flip side of that is you also get paid last because the venue gets their money first. The advertisers get their money first. The marketing people get their money first. Anybody you hire to help out, they get their money first. And then after all of that, you hope that there's some money left over. And the hope there is, obviously, that there will be some left over. But again, the potential is there could be quite a bit of money left over. And there's infinite potential for the money left over to just get higher and higher exponentially. Whereas the other way, that money ain't ever getting higher. And that is the game that I am playing right now. So that is what's going on this week. Our 3 shows with the Midlife Crisis Comedy Show. And I'm also just really trying to find out what this next 20 minutes of my stand-up bit is going to look like. And I have been writing ferociously. After I get off this podcast, I got a little bit more work to do, and then I am going to go to the library. I am going to disconnect, put my phone down, and commit to get about a good I'd like to get close to like 3 hours of writing. I feel like that's what I need, is 3 hours of concentrated, uninterrupted, focused writing to sort of break through this little slump that I'm in. So we'll see how that goes. Now, with that, let's turn to the second half of the Paul Green Comedy PaulCast, where I have been giving my analysis of the 48 Laws of Power by Robert Greene and going through each law one by one and giving my take on it. Today's law is back to a law that I really think is a sinister law. I think it is evil. But again, I can't argue that if you were in a position where obtaining absolute power was your only drive and only ambition, and you didn't care who you hurt to get there, or who you victimize, or what sort of relationships you may or may not have when you get that power, then by all means, I think these laws would be effective. And the law today, I don't remember how he worded it exactly, but the gist of it is to give people like 2 options, so that they have to, or it's kind of like trick them into believing there are only 2 options, and then they have to choose one of them, and it's always going to be like the lesser of 2 evils. First of all, to even be in a position to manipulate anybody or a group of people into 2 options means that you've probably have already obtained some fairly significant power, and most likely have done so in a evil, sinister manner already. So good for you. And again, this is a situation or a law where I go, yeah, I can see how that would be very effective in terms of manipulating the masses. And we don't have to look further than our current political system to say that, well, that already exists. This idea that there are 2 options, you have to choose one of them, and it's almost always going to be the lesser of 2 evils, no matter which way you go. Oh gosh, I cannot even broach politics. In the context of this discussion, it's just such a very clear and present example of this law. And I think a good illustration of how destructive these laws can be when somebody who has no other aim than power is utilizing them, and is utilizing them against the masses. So again, I can't disagree with the fact that this law is effective and that this law does get practiced. And that perhaps if that is your aim, then you may have to make that decision that you're also just going to be an evil an evil predatory person to gain power, and do so by manipulating and controlling the masses into a false binary dichotomy. Does that all make sense? A false dichotomy of binary? I don't know. I think I'm trying to sound smarter than I actually am. There's a law, or what do they call it? Logical fallacies. One of the logical fallacies or fallacies that has to do with this principle. Does Does anybody know what I am thinking of out there? I think it's... I'm using the term false binary. I don't actually think that's what it is, but it's that concept to where you are looking at a problem as though there is only two potential outcomes. And it's like, well, it's either got to be all this or all that, when almost no problems are that reductive. And oftentimes in life, the way to a proper solution is to not look at it as an either-or situation, but to look at it from many different angles and to determine a more complex, or maybe in some cases an even more simple solution that's a win-win for everybody. But that isn't the world we live in. We very much live in, especially in the political system, of a win-lose system. It's like either your guy wins or your guy loses. And if you lose, you're sad. And the other team is happy. And if your guy wins, then you're happy and the other team is sad. And there's just no perceivable other option. It's either Tweedledee or Tweedledum. And again, I keep referencing the political system because I think that is just probably the most glaring and significant demonstration of this idea. And yet the system perpetuates year after year, election cycle after election cycle, trying to find a better solution to where maybe there's actually more available candidates that maybe more human beings would actually prefer to run the country. It just doesn't ever really seem to work out that way. So anyway, I keep saying I don't want to get political, and then I get political again. I can't stomach it. So I would say in my lifetime, I have been served more fully by approaching problems as much as I can with a holistic approach, and to try to not always reduce every problem into it's got to be all this or all that. But maybe there's just a better way for more people to get what they want and to have more problems solved in a more in a way that is more universally beneficial to the most amount of people. And exercising this law of power and trying to convince everybody that they have to choose between two bad options, to me, sure, that may perpetuate somebody to a position of power, but I don't think it perpetuates anybody to a position of creating effective solutions for the most amount of people, or for yourself, or creating the most fulfilling and connected and meaningful life. So there you go. Not a fan of this one. But again, that isn't to say that I don't acknowledge that we live in a world with cynical, evil people who don't think twice about vying for absolute power and have no reservations about who they leave in their wake. So that just ain't a life that I am choosing to live. But who knows, maybe one of those people will, be able to manipulate me into their system. All right, everybody. Man, it's so funny because this podcast is supposed to be positive because I'm like all about going for dreams and stuff. And then for some reason, I started reading the 48 Laws of Power. I was like, hey, I should talk about this. And then I find so much of the laws so negative and evil that I usually end up the end of the podcast being so negative, which is not really who I am. It's just that this is the book that I'm commenting on. Don't worry. I think I'm at Law 32. So we've got 16 more days. And after this book, I am going to find another book because I like doing this sort of book report thing. It's fun for me. And whatever book I read next, I'm going to make sure is a positive one. All right, everybody. I hope you're all doing well. I hope your dreams are coming true. You're pushing through. You are trying to find ways to live a fulfilling life, pursuing whatever is meaningful to you, and finding joy on that journey. So this is the Paul Green Comedy Podcast. Today is August 6th, 2024. This is episode 249. I love you all so much, and I will check in with you tomorrow.